When two of hip-hop's biggest giants, Kendrick Lamar and Drake, collide, the entire music world stops to watch. But this time, the battle isn't just about music, chart positions, or clever diss tracks. It's something far more personal, and it's hitting way below the belt. Recent reports sent shockwaves across the industry after claims surfaced that, during an ongoing legal battle, Drake's side allegedly brought up Kendrick Lamar's children. Now, everyone knows rap beefs are nothing new. Diss records, subtle jabs, and public shade are practically a tradition in hip-hop culture. But there's an unspoken rule that most artists follow. Family stays off limits. Crossing that line changes everything, and Kendrick Lamar is making sure the world knows exactly how he feels about it. The reactions online have been explosive. Fans on social media are split between disbelief and outrage. Some are saying, this is way too far, while others insist, this isn't about music anymore. This is personal. And Kendrick's response? Sharp, direct, and unapologetic. He's not just defending his name, it's protecting his family. It's cool. And he's doing it in a way only Kendrick can. This is the spark that takes the rivalry to an entirely new level. Because let's be real, beef between Drake and Kendrick has always kept the culture entertained. But involving kids pushes the feud into dangerous territory. The stakes are higher, the emotions are raw, and the potential fallout could shake up the careers of both superstars. So the big questions are, why would Drake let things escalate to this point? Was it a calculated move, a desperate tactic, or simply a misunderstanding blown out of proportion? And just how far is Kendrick willing to go now that his children have been dragged into the spotlight? Stick around, because in this deep dive, we're not just recapping headlines, we're breaking down every angle of this story, from the details of the lawsuit to Kendrick's fiery response. From fan reactions to expert commentary, by the end of this, you'll have a clear picture of how ugly this battle has gotten and who might actually come out on top. Hip-hop has always thrived on competition. From the earliest days of rap battles in New York, block parties, to the modern era of chart-topping megastars, rivalry is the fuel that keeps the culture alive. And in the past decade, few rivalries have captured more attention than the one between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. These two names aren't just rappers. They represent two very different schools of thought within the culture. Kendrick is often seen as the poet, the storyteller, the conscious lyricist who uses his art to speak truth and push boundaries. Drake, on the other hand, is the global hitmaker, the crossover king who dominates radio, streaming charts, and pop culture conversations. For years, fans have speculated about tension between the two. Subtle lines in verses, little digs in interviews, and side comments in the media have kept the speculation alive. Some of these subliminals go back to the early 2010s, when Kendrick dropped his now legendary verse on Control, calling out nearly every rapper in the game, including Drake. That verse shifted the entire rap landscape. Suddenly, Kendrick was no longer just a promising artist from Compton. He was the one challenging the throne, and Drake happened to be sitting on it. From that moment on, the dynamic between them became one of hip-hop's most talked-about storylines. Drake, always aware of his image and reputation, occasionally responded with subtle bars of his own, though never directly addressing Kendrick by name in a full-on diss track. Kendrick, meanwhile, would use features and performances to send coded messages. It was never outright war, but it was a cold war, a game of chess played in plain sight. Fast forward to recent years, and the rivalry has only intensified. Both men are now cemented as icons, with massive fan bases that often clash online. For Kendrick, every project feels like a cultural statement, something that demands attention not just for the music, but for the message. For Drake, every release feels like an event, a guaranteed chart topper that dominates radio and playlists. In many ways, they are the yin and yang of modern rap. one driven by art, the other by reach. But what makes this current controversy so different and so explosive is that it's no longer about music. A lawsuit involving these two megastars has opened the door to personal lives being dragged into the spotlight. And when word got out that Kendrick's children were allegedly mentioned in this legal battle, it felt like the unspoken rules of hip-hop were broken. Family, especially kids, has always been sacred ground. Even the most bitter rap rivals in history, from Tupac versus Biggie to Nas versus Jay-Z, rarely let their beef spill over into dragging children. So here we are, watching history unfold in real time. Kendrick Lamar, usually measured and private, when it comes to his family, has reached a breaking point. And Drake, whether intentionally or not, has lit a fire that could reshape how this rivalry is remembered. The music world is buzzing, the fans are divided, and the tension has never been higher. This isn't just another rap beef. This is a defining moment in the careers of two of the biggest stars of our generation. And as we dive deeper, we'll uncover exactly how things escalated, why Kendrick's response is making headlines, and what this means for the future of hip-hop. Legal battles in the entertainment industry are nothing new. Artists sue each other, labels clash with performers, and contracts get challenged in court all the time. But when names as big as Kendrick Lamar and Drake end up entangled in legal drama, it's not just another case buried in the paperwork. It becomes front-page news. The origins of this particular lawsuit trace back to business disputes involving rights, contracts, and financial obligations. While both Kendrick and Drake operate in very different lanes musically, their worlds intersect behind the scenes in publishing rights, touring deals, and shared business networks. As the details of the legal proceedings began to surface, most fans assumed it was just another typical case of high-profile artists navigating the messy, complex world of music business contracts. But then, things took an unexpected turn. Reports began circulating that in the process of building a legal strategy, Kendrick Lamar's children were allegedly mentioned in court filings or legal arguments connected to Drake's team. The exact context wasn't immediately clear. Was it a tactic to question Kendrick's schedule and availability? Was it an attempt to highlight his responsibilities as a parent to undermine his position? Or was it simply a line taken out of context, magnified by media headlines hungry for clicks? Whatever the explanation, the effect was the same. Fans were stunned. In the unwritten code of hip-hop, rivalries are supposed to stay between the artists. Diss tracks, fair game. Personal jabs, common. But kids, families, that's a line very few are willing to cross. Suddenly, what might have been a typical celebrity lawsuit had turned into a cultural flashpoint. Because Kendrick Lamar is not just any rapper. He's someone who has built his career and reputation on authenticity, integrity, and protecting his private life. For years, Kendrick has kept his family away from the spotlight. Unlike many artists who share personal details on social media, he's been intentional about creating a boundary between his public persona and his private world. So when news spread that his children had been pulled into the legal conversation, even indirectly, it felt like an attack on the very thing he values most. The court documents themselves weren't immediately accessible to the general public, but the narrative quickly took on a life of its own. Media outlets ran with headlines suggesting that Drake's legal strategy had crossed an unspoken line. Social media erupted with debates. Was this a calculated move by Drake's team to gain leverage? Or was it a misstep blown out of proportion by blogs and gossip accounts? What made the situation even messier was the history between these two artists. Fans who had been following their rivalry for years were quick to connect the dots. This wasn't just about business. This was personal. And for Kendrick, that meant firing back. Behind the scenes, Insiders describe the mood in Kendrick's camp as one of frustration and determination. If it had only been about money or contracts, Kendrick might have handled it quietly through lawyers. But with his kids involved, he felt compelled to step forward. His response wasn't just legal, it was emotional, cultural, and artistic. In the court of public opinion, Kendrick was going to make sure the world knew that this was one step too far. And that's where the tension skyrocketed. Because now, the lawsuit wasn't just a matter of legal documents and lawyers and suits. It had spilled into the world of hip-hop culture, where every move is analyzed, every word is dissected, and every headline adds fuel to the fire. The legal battle had opened a door that neither side could close. What started as a dispute over contracts had turned into one of the most personal and high-stakes chapters in the ongoing rivalry between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And for fans, this was more than just entertainment, it was a glimpse into just how far their favorite artists might be willing to go to protect their legacies. When the news broke that Kendrick Lamar's children had been mentioned in connection with the lawsuit, the reaction was immediate. Fans, critics, and the industry all turned their attention to one man: Kendrick. Would he let it slide, allowing lawyers to handle everything behind closed doors? Or would he step out of his usual silence and address the matter head-on? The answer came quickly. Kendrick has always been the type of artist who carefully chooses his words. He doesn't flood social media with posts he doesn't thrive on controversy, and he rarely lets the outside world get a glimpse of his private life. But when it comes to his family, especially his children, silence was no longer an option. This time, he had to speak. Those closest to him said his first reaction was a mix of shock and disappointment. It wasn't about money or contracts anymore. It was about principle. Kendrick had always accepted that being in the spotlight meant taking shots, hearing criticism, and being the target of other rappers. But dragging his kids into a legal fight that crossed a line he could never ignore. To him, it wasn't just disrespectful, it was low. And so, Kendrick responded with a calm but powerful statement. He didn't rant. He didn't explode. Instead, he made it clear in measured words that his children had nothing to do with this battle, and that anyone trying to use them as leverage would be called out. It was a father's voice, speaking louder than a rapper's ego. Fans felt the weight of it immediately. They saw not just the superstar, but the protective dad drawing a line in the sand. What made the reaction so striking was the way Kendrick framed it. He didn't just defend his own family. He turned the situation into a larger cultural conversation. He reminded everyone of the unwritten code in hip-hop, the line that even the fiercest rivalries should never cross. Diss tracks, fair game. Subtle insults, expected. But children, families, those were off limits. His words carried the kind of authority that only someone like Kendrick could deliver. Steady, precise, and impossible to dismiss. The public response was overwhelming. Social media lit up with support. Hashtags spread in his defense. And even people outside of hip-hop praised him for standing up as a father first and an artist second. Kendrick's calm but firm reaction flipped the narrative entirely. What started as a messy lawsuit had now become a cultural debate about respect, limits, and values in the rap game. Kendrick Lamar had drawn the line. The only question left was whether Drake would respect it, or push things even further. The moment Kendrick's reaction hit the public, the shockwaves spread far beyond courtrooms and contracts. It wasn't just about him or Drake anymore. It became a cultural earthquake. Fans who had followed the Cold War between these two giants for over a decade suddenly found themselves in the middle of the most personal chapter yet. And their responses reflected just how deeply hip-hop culture had been shaken. On social media, timelines were flooded with posts, memes, and threads. Supporters of Kendrick rallied behind him instantly, praising him not just as an artist, but as a father defending his family. "This isn't beef anymore. This is real life," one fan wrote, echoing a sentiment that spread quickly across platforms. For many, Kendrick's calm but firm stance represented a kind of strength that went beyond music. He wasn't just battling. Drake now, he was standing up for boundaries, values, and respect in a genre that thrives on rivalry, but still depends on certain lines never being crossed. Drake's fans, of course, saw things differently. Some argued that the media had exaggerated the situation, that Kendrick's children weren't truly being targeted, and that people were blowing the whole thing out of proportion. Others tried to frame it as part of the game, insisting that when artists go to war, whether in music or in business, everything is fair. But even within Drake's own fan base, there was discomfort. The idea of involving children didn't sit well with many, and it showed in how cautious some supporters were in defending him this time around. Beyond the fans, the hip-hop community itself began weighing in. Industry veterans, journalists, and cultural commentators all added their voices. Some compared the situation to past rivalries, like Nas and Jay-Z, or Tupac and Biggie, pointing out that even in those legendary battles, was usually a line drawn around family. Others said the feud was proof of how high the stakes had become in modern hip-hop, where reputations, legacies, and massive global audiences push artists to extremes. What stood out most, though, was how the narrative began to shift. For years, the Kendrick versus Drake's rivalry had been entertaining, something fans debated online with passion and humor. It was competitive, yes, but it was also fun. This time, the tone felt heavier. It wasn't just about who had the better bars, or who sold more records. It was about real lives, private matters, and the blurred line between art and reality. Hip-hop had always been raw and personal, but now the conversation was different. How far is too far? Kendrick's response fueled that debate in a way that felt bigger than him. He became the voice for something many in the culture already believed but rarely articulated. In his calm, deliberate way, he reminded everyone that while hip-hop is built on rivalry, it doesn't have to abandon humanity. Fans saw him as the artist holding on to the principles of the game, even while others might be willing to sacrifice them for a win. The cultural impact extended beyond the immediate fan. Wars. Media outlets picked up the story, framing it as a moment of moral clarity within hip-hop. Headlines ran with angles like Kendrick defends his family and where hip-hop draws the line. Even outside of the music world, mainstream commentators chimed in, pointing to the feud as an example of the pressure and toxicity that often come with fame. And then came the speculation. If Kendrick had responded so firmly, what would he do next? Would he put his feelings into a track, following the tradition of rap beefs where the ultimate response comes in the form of music? Fans started combing through his catalog, looking for parallels, revisiting moments when he had addressed rivals with subtle lines and coded messages. The anticipation of a response record added even more fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, Drake's silence or his carefully measured words, depending on the day, only made things more intense. Every move he made was dissected, every statement overanalyzed. The hip-hop world was watching, waiting, wondering whether he would double down or take a step back. For the first time in years, it felt like the balance of power in their rivalry was shifting. Kendrick wasn't just competing musically anymore. He had taken the moral high ground, and that made the battle feel entirely different. In the end, the impact on hip-hop culture was undeniable. This wasn't just another rap beef. It was a cultural reckoning, a moment where fans, artists, and commentators had to ask themselves what hip-hop should stand for. Was it endless competition at any cost? Or was it rivalry within boundaries that still respected the personal lives of those involved? The answer wasn't simple, but one thing was clear. Kendrick's reaction had forced everyone to confront the question. And no matter what came next, the feud between him and Drake would never be seen the same way again. As the controversy grew, all eyes turned to Drake. The headlines were stacked against him. The conversation was dominated by Kendrick's calm but powerful response. And fans across the internet were questioning whether he had gone too far. For an artist who thrives on controlling narratives, this was dangerous territory. Drake has always been a master of image. Throughout his career, he's built a reputation not just on hit records, but on charisma and calculated moves that keep him relevant. Whether it's a meme-worthy dance, a slick Instagram caption, or a surprise track drop, Drake knows how to stay in the center of attention. But this time, the spotlight wasn't flattering, it was interrogating. And Drake had to make a choice: deny, defend, or deflect. At first, Drake kept things quiet. He didn't rush to Twitter or Instagram with a rant, and he didn't give interviews right away. This silence left fans and critics to speculate. Some said his team was strategizing, trying to craft the perfect response before he spoke. Others claimed he was deliberately avoiding the issue, hoping it would fade away under the endless churn of entertainment news. But the story wasn't going anywhere. Kendrick's stance had turned it into something larger than gossip. Now a question of respect and values. When Drake finally addressed the controversy, his approach was measured. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, insisting that no harm or disrespect was intended. According to him, the mention of Kendrick's children in the legal filings wasn't an attack. It was a procedural detail taken out of context and blown up by the media. He suggested that bloggers and gossip sites had twisted the narrative, turning paperwork into drama for clicks. For his supporters, this explanation made sense. They argued that Kendrick's reaction, while powerful, might have been fueled more by headlines than by the actual intent of Drake's legal team. They saw Drake as the victim of media exaggeration, someone being painted as the villain in a story where the truth was more complicated. To them, Drake's calm denial was the smart move. Why add fuel to the fire when silence and subtle clarification might make the storm pass? But not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed out that even if the mention of Kendrick's kids was unintentional, the responsibility still fell on Drake's shoulders. His name was attached to the case. His team filed the documents, and his reputation was on the line. For those already skeptical of Drake, this looked less like a misunderstanding and more like a sign of desperation, a superstar so determined to win that his camp crossed a sacred boundary. The tension only grew when Drake started dropping subliminal lines in his music around the same time. Some fans dissected his lyrics, convinced he was throwing shade back at Kendrick, while others argued he was avoiding the subject altogether, choosing not to dignify it with a direct response. As always with Drake, interpretation became part of the game. Was he addressing Kendrick directly, or was it coincidence? Was he holding back out of respect, or was he dodging accountability? What made Drake's side even more complicated was the split within his own fanbase. Some hardcore supporters doubled down, defending him against any criticism and attacking Kendrick for being too sensitive. Others, however, admitted they were uncomfortable with the optics. They respected Drake's dominance in music, but didn't like the idea of kids being dragged into the fight, no matter the context. It was one of the rare moments where Drake, usually untouchable in the court of public opinion, found himself on shaky ground. Meanwhile, the media seized on every angle. Some outlets gave Drake the benefit of the doubt, running stories about misinterpretation and media exaggeration. Others went harder, framing him as the one who crossed a cultural red line. The conversation became a tug of war, and Drake's every move, or lack of a move, was scrutinized. Through it all, Drake maintained his signature cool. He didn't lash out at Kendrick directly, and he didn't admit fault. Instead, he leaned on his greatest strength: consistency. He kept dropping music, kept appearing at shows, and kept reminding the world that he was still Drake, the biggest artist in the game. Controversy or not. For some fans, this was enough. For others, it felt like deflection. But whether people believed him or not, Drake's side of the story highlighted something important about his place in hip-hop. He has always been both loved and doubted, celebrated and criticized. To his supporters, he's the ultimate hitmaker who transcends the rules of rap. To his detractors, he's the superstar who sometimes plays the game too safely, too strategically, and too carefully. And in this feud with Kendrick, those divisions became sharper than ever. By the end of his response, one thing was clear: Drake wasn't backing down. He might not have fired back with the same intensity as Kendrick, but he wasn't retreating. Either he was betting that his consistency, his dominance, and his ability to outlast controversy would carry him through. Whether that strategy would work, however, depended on what came next from Kendrick, from the fans, and from the culture as a whole. When the dust began to settle from the initial wave of fan reactions, the story didn't disappear, it grew. And that's because the media and cultural commentators stepped in, dissecting every detail, every statement, and every possible implication of the feud between Kendrick, Lamar, and Drake. What had started as a courtroom issue had turned into a cultural debate, and the press was eager to weigh in. Major hip-hop outlets were the first to jump on it. Blogs and podcasts dedicated to rap culture unpacked the controversy day after day. Some hosts applauded Kendrick for standing firm, praising him as a man of principle who wasn't afraid to defend his family. They argued that this response was consistent with everything he's built his career on: authenticity, integrity, and loyalty to the values that made him respected worldwide. Others questioned whether Kendrick might have overreacted to what they saw as a minor legal detail blown out of proportion by click-hungry blogs. The back and forth created endless discussion, and fans tuned in eagerly, choosing sides as they listened. Then came the mainstream media. Outlets like Rolling Stone, Billboard, and even television talk shows picked up the story. Suddenly, this wasn't just a rap beef, it was national news. The framing often positioned Kendrick as a protective father, a man unwilling to let fame compromise his role at home. That angle resonated beyond hip-hop, reaching audiences who might not follow rap closely but could relate to the universal idea of protecting one's children. Drake, meanwhile, was painted as the superstar caught in the middle of a narrative he didn't fully control. Legal experts also weighed in, analyzing the court filings and trying to determine whether the mention of Kendrick's children had been intentional or simply procedural. Some lawyers argued that it wasn't unusual for personal details to be included in such documents, especially when issues like scheduling or personal commitments came into play. Others countered that regardless of intent, the optics were terrible. In high-profile cases, they said, perception often matters more than the dry language of the law. And in this case, the perception was that Drake's camp had crossed a line. Hip-hop historians and cultural critics took the conversation even deeper. They compared the feud to legendary rivalries of the past, noting how rare it was for family to be pulled into the spotlight. Nas and Jay-Z, Tupac and Biggie, even at their PDE, even at their most heated, the conflict stayed centered on the artists themselves. To these critics, the Drake versus Kendrick battle reflected the modern state of hip-hop, a world where fame is global. Social media amplifies every detail, and the pressure to dominate at all costs can sometimes blur boundaries that once seemed sacred. Podcasters and YouTubers, always quick to capture the moment, capitalized on the drama. Long-form discussions popped up analyzing not just the feud itself, but what it revealed about both artists. Some argued that Kendrick's measured approach showed maturity and strength, while Drake's strategy of denial and deflection revealed his vulnerability. Others flipped the script, suggesting that Kendrick might have seized on the situation to gain the moral high ground. knowing full well that public sympathy was a powerful weapon in any rivalry. What made the media coverage so fascinating was how it reflected the artist's images. Kendrick, already viewed as the thoughtful poet of hip-hop, was now being framed as a man of principle, standing up against unnecessary disrespect. Drake, often seen as the global superstar who thrives in drama but avoids getting his hands dirty, was portrayed as calculating, maybe too calculating. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and commentators used it to fuel endless think pieces. The debate even spilled into academic spaces. Cultural studies professors and sociologists commented on the feud, pointing out how it touched on broader themes of masculinity, fatherhood, and respect in Black culture. They noted how Kendrick's defense of his children resonated with audiences tired of seeing celebrities put spectacle above humanity. Meanwhile, Drake's handling of the controversy raised questions about the costs of being the biggest star in the world. Does fame demand strategies that sometimes backfire, even unintentionally? Perhaps the most telling part of the media response was the prediction game. Everyone wanted to know what happens next. Some analysts were convinced Kendrick was preparing a diss track that would shake the culture, using the controversy as fuel for his art. Others believed Drake would bounce back the way he always does, by flooding the charts with hits that distract the world from the noise. Still others suggested that this feud might actually cool down, with both men realizing the stakes were too personal and deciding to step back before things spiraled further. But regardless of the predictions, one thing united nearly every commentator: acknowledgement that the feud had already changed the way people looked at Drake and Kendrick. It wasn't just another sparring match between two rap titans. It had become a defining moment in both their legacies, one that revealed who they were, not just as artists, but as men. And so, as the media cycle churned and experts weighed in, the story of Kendrick versus Drake became bigger than hip-hop. It became a cultural touchstone, a moment that forced fans, critics, and even the artists themselves to reckon with the question of how far is too far, and what happens when the line is finally crossed. As the smoke begins to clear, one thing is undeniable: this feud has reshaped the conversation around both Kendrick Lamar and Drake. What started as a legal battle quickly evolved into something far more personal, far more emotional, and far more impactful than anyone could have predicted. Kendrick's decision to speak out, not as an artist, but as a father, struck a chord that rippled far beyond music. He reminded the world that behind every superstar is a human being with values, responsibilities, and boundaries that should never be crossed. That moment may prove to be a defining point in his legacy, showing fans that he isn't just one of the greatest lyricists alive, but also someone who stands tall when it matters most. Drake, on the other hand, finds himself at a crossroads as one of the most successful artists in history. He's built a career on controlling narratives, turning controversy into content, and bouncing back stronger after every storm. But this time feels different. The inclusion of family in the narrative has shaken even his most loyal supporters. And the way he chooses to respond from here could either reinforce his empire or leave cracks that his rivals and his critics won't forget. The hip-hop world now waits with anticipation. Will Kendrick channel his emotions into a new track, transforming this personal slight into an artistic statement that echoes for years? Will Drake respond directly, using his influence and his music to reclaim control of the story? Or will both men choose to step back, allowing time and silence to heal what words and lawsuits cannot? One thing is certain: this moment will be remembered. It's not just about a lawsuit or even about two rap giants colliding. It's about respect, about the invisible lines that define the culture, and about the choices artists make when those lines are crossed. For years to come, fans will point back to this battle as a turning point, not just in their rivalry, but in the way hip-hop itself confronts personal boundaries. And so, as the story continues to unfold, one message rings louder than any diss. Track or headline, family comes first. In the end, the legacy of this feud might not be about who won or lost, but about who stood up for what truly mattered. Thanks for watching my Mighty X channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.